Everyone thought John died on the operating table during an emergency liver transplant. His medical records were sealed. The hospital released a vague statement, and within 24 hours, his name was removed from the database. No funeral. Just a press note from Sophia's PR team. He fought bravely. Cameras caught her walking out of the hospital in designer sunglasses. Hand in hand with Ryan, her childhood best friend, turned comfort figure. The world sighed. They called it tragic, romantic, inevitable. What they didn't know was that John hadn't died. He had been moved. Not to the morgue, but to a privately funded neurological wing, owned by the same family that owned the hospital itself. John remembered flashes, beeping machines, whispered voices, a nurse saying, "He's stable, but no ID. He's been flagged." Then weeks of darkness. He woke up restrained, unable to speak, his name wiped from every record that proved he ever existed. The donor registry labeled him anonymous. He became a patient with no past, recovering in silence under the care of strangers. But as he healed, he started to remember. Not everything's just moments. Sophia crying at his bedside days before the surgery. Her whispering, "Just live, okay?" And Ryan's voice not long after, "If he doesn't make it, you have to let go." Now John stands at the back of the chapel. The marble arches are draped in soft white fabric. Dozens of doves are about to be released. Everything is perfect. Sophia wears white. Ryan stands beside her. The guests begin to murmur as the processional starts. The organ plays that hollow, ceremonial tune. John's hands are tucked in his pockets. His hair is shorter now, scars hidden beneath his collar. No one recognizes him. He doesn't plan to interrupt the wedding. That would be loud, theatrical. He doesn't want noise. He wants silence to do the screaming. So he waits. He signs the guest book. Leaves no name, only a quiet circle drawn in. The corner of the page, the way he used to doodle when bored, during their old university lectures. She notice. Eventually, she'll feel it like a draft through the seams of her dress. A memory sliding in where it doesn't belong. Sophia smiles for the cameras. Her hand never leaves Ryan's arm. John watches her eyes as she scans the crowd, sees nothing, and still shivers. Her body knows before her mind does. The priest begins the ceremony. The guests rise. Sophia's voice doesn't falter when she says "I do." But her gaze flinches once to the back pew, where a man she doesn't know is staring at her with a stillness too familiar to ignore. John doesn't move. He doesn't blink. He doesn't need to. His absence already broke her once. Now his presence will finish the job. He walks out before they kiss, quietly. No one stops him. At the chapel gates, the valet tries to ask for his name to retrieve his vehicle. John doesn't answer. He just walks away, leaving behind the illusion of death that everyone else chose to believe. The only question now is how long they'll last before they realize the grave they dug was empty, and their peace was borrowed. John was the kind of man who went unnoticed in a room full of noise, but never forgotten by those who once truly saw him. He was an orphan by the time he was 7, the product of a fire no one took responsibility for. His childhood was divided between foster homes and library corners. By 15, he could repair any broken appliance in the house. By 21, he was developing biomedical software for hospitals that didn't even know his name. Quiet, sharp, patient to the point of cruelty, if provoked. And when he loved, he did it without hesitation. He met Sophia during a volunteer cleanup drive at a ruined health clinic. She was already being followed by cameras. Her foundation was funding the entire rebuilding project, her signature on every donation plaque. John was assigned to the tech wing. She noticed his hand scarred, mechanical, methodical. He noticed her silence when the cameras turned off. Not awkward silence, but calm. She didn't speak to fill space. She let the weight of a moment carry itself. They started seeing each other outside the project site. First as colleagues, then as friends. And when Sophia broke off her high-profile engagement to a politician's son, they became something more. Something real. For a while, it felt like the world had stopped watching them. No interviews. No headlines. Just John walking beside her, always one step behind, when the spotlight found them again. Then came the diagnosis. John's liver was deteriorating faster than the doctors had predicted. His own software flagged the data ironic, that he would become a patient to the system he helped build. Sophia insisted he go through with the transplant. She held his hand during the screenings. She brought food to the hospital. She laughed off his fears with that soft confidence only she could fake so well. But behind the support, behind every perfectly worded message to her social media followers, something shifted. When he asked if she'd stay with him if the surgery failed, she replied with a kiss and left before he could read her eyes. Then there was Ryan, tall, smiling, polished. The son of her parents' business partner. He'd known Sophia since childhood. They dated briefly before university, broke it off for the sake of appearances, but always kept in touch. Ryan was the opposite of John in every way, expressive, politically savvy, the kind of man who could charm a room while remembering the names of every child in the crowd. John never trusted him. But Sophia assured him there was nothing there. Ryan was just around, just helping, just concerned. On the day of John's surgery, Ryan was the one holding her phone outside the OR. He was the one whispering to the PR team. He was the one who escorted her home when the attending nurse walked out hours later and simply said, "We're sorry." He didn't make it. No autopsy. No formal declaration. Just a paperwork trail that vanished into the donor archives, and no funeral. Sophia said John had wished to be cremated in privacy. She cried on cue. Donated generously in his name. Then she disappeared for a few weeks. When she returned, she wore a new ring. The engagement was simple, elegant. The caption read, "In love, we heal. In healing, we remember." John woke up in a private clinic 3 months later. Alive, alone. No visitors, no identification. No trace of who had signed him off as dead. Only a wristband with an encrypted barcode. It took him 6 days to learn how to walk again. 7 to speak. 10 to remember her name and Ryan's. He didn't get angry. John didn't scream. He requested access to his records. He was told they didn't exist. He asked for a lawyer. The nurse smiled and adjusted his drip. Eventually, he stopped asking questions out loud, but he never stopped remembering. The way Sophia's eyes didn't meet his on the last morning. The way Ryan hugged her too tightly. The way the surgical consent was signed and submitted before John ever entered the OR. All of it was burned into him. And beneath it all was the echo of a sentence she had once whispered. During a thunderstorm, curled up against him, "If anything ever happens to you, I won't survive it." She had survived, she had thrived, and she had replaced him. Deborah enters the story much later. She's the kind of person who doesn't appear until after everyone else has walked away. A former medical ethics auditor, she had once worked on a project John helped code. She recognized the pattern of access logs when John contacted her anonymously. She didn't ask for details, just sent him an address, a burner laptop, and a quiet note, "You're not crazy." And they didn't just let you die, they planned to let you disappear. With her help, John traced every digital signature leading to his erased records. The files were modified by a private account tied to Ryan's family office. Sophia had also logged into the donor database 3 hours before John's flatline was declared. She had manually approved the tissue transfer that legally finalized his donation. Every click had a timestamp. Don didn't tell Deborah the whole truth. Not at first, he didn't want sympathy. He only needed silence. She understood. She had once been betrayed by a man she loved too, and though she never said it, the way she always left the light on when John stayed in her guest room told him enough. He wasn't alone anymore. But he wasn't healed either. Sophia kept showing up in the news, featured in medical fundraisers, awards ceremonies, smiling beside Ryan with the poise of a perfect spouse. John watched her interviews like one might study a crime scene. Every word calibrated, every tear believable, every lie so familiar it almost made him believe it again. Until the day she announced their wedding, then. John circled the date on the calendar, not to ruin it, but to return. John didn't interrupt the ceremony. He stood there, back straight, invisible by choice. The crowd was too busy applauding Sophia and Ryan's vows to notice the man in the back row who never clapped. After the ceremony, he moved through the crowd like mist, unnoticed. He signed the guest book, not with his name, just the symbol, a tiny circle with a line through it. The same mark he used to sign her coffee cups. Back in college, when she forgot her name in the rush of board meetings and social appearances, he placed it on the same page where she signed her wedding registry. The ink hadn't even dried. When Sophia saw it, an hour later, she froze mid-step. Her smile, still pasted on for the cameras, faded. Her eyes moved across the guests, searching. She didn't know what she was looking for. Her knees weakened. Her fingers clutched Ryan's arm, tighter than necessary. When he asked her what was wrong, she shook her head and said it was nothing, just a dizzy spell. Maybe nerves. She forced a smile. Ryan offered her champagne. John watched it all unfold from the far corner of the garden. He leaned against a marble pillar like a shadow. That no one cast, not bitter, not angry. Just waiting for the weight of her own conscience to do what a confrontation never could. That night, Sophia dreamed of rain. She was in a hospital hallway, alone. A voice echoed from the room behind her, soft and deliberate. "You signed the release form. Why did you sign it?" She turned, but the door wouldn't open. The handle was cold, unmovable. The light under the door flickered, then went dark. The hallway stretched longer. The tiles below her feet cracked. The name on the door faded too. White dot, she woke up gasping. Ryan slept beside her, undisturbed. Meanwhile, John filed a formal request to the hospital board. The documents were drafted under his legal name, reinstated quietly, through a loophole Deborah found involving patient misidentification in private donor units. He requested sealed surgical footage, audit logs, and timestamps from the day of the transplant. He didn't threaten legal action. He didn't make a scene. Just asked for the truth, quietly, backed by laws that most administrators had forgotten existed. The hospital delayed their response, but the delay itself was an answer. Deborah warned him they'd stall, bury, delay. She offered to help escalate, but John declined. The longer they hesitated, the more power he gathered. He wanted the truth to rot them from the inside, not explode them from the outside. Noise fades. Guilt doesn't. Sophia's second nightmare came 2 days later. She was in the chapel again, wearing her gown, but alone. No guests, no Ryan. The pews were filled with copies of the same man, John's face. Over and over again, staring, silent. One by one, they stood and turned their backs to her. The priest read the vows aloud, but in John's voice. When he reached "Do you take her?" the ceiling cracked, and she screamed herself awake. Ryan told her she was stressed. Maybe it was the wedding. Maybe guilt from moving on too fast. Maybe her therapist should prescribe something stronger. John never reached out to her. Never sent a message. Never called. That was the cruelty, his silence. It gave her no closure. No excuse. No room to explain. Behind closed doors, the hospital board scrambled. One of the directors recognized the barcode Deborah submitted from John's recovery bracelet. It matched a flagged case. The patient was listed as donor recovered. No return of cognitive function. Except he was clearly walking, speaking. Requesting legal access now. They launched an internal investigation, quietly. The kind that never sees the light of press. The kind meant to cover liability, not reveal truth. John already knew what they'd find. He didn't need the audit to tell him Sophia had authorized his release. He remembered her hand holding the pen. He remembered her signature on the consent form. He remembered the way she said, "It's just a formality," while avoiding eye contact. She had planned it. Or at least accepted it. Now she had to live with it. Ryan remained oblivious. He didn't know the guestbook had been tampered with. He didn't notice Sophia's sudden need for sleeping pills. Or the way she stared at old photo albums when he wasn't looking. Or how her hand trembled when she passed the old hospital every Sunday morning. John rented a small apartment near the city edge. No social media. No press appearances. No loud declarations. He went to therapy. He ate in silence. Sometimes, Deborah visited, brought food, told him about other patients who disappeared into the system. He listened without reply. The revenge wasn't about making her suffer publicly. That would make her a victim. This wasn't about vengeance by fire. It was about erosion. Truth, slow and deliberate, wearing down the foundation of every lie she had built. He didn't want her to bleed. He wanted her to question every breath she took. Wonder if she still deserved it. Sophia's third nightmare came unprompted. She was back at the hospital, holding John's hand. But when she pulled back the blanket, his body was gone. Just a note rested on the sheets. "You buried the wrong man." The heart monitor kept beeping, louder, louder, until it screamed into a flatline she couldn't silence. She woke up choking on nothing. Ryan rushed water to her lips. She whispered John's name before she realized it. That was the beginning of the crack. By the time she received an anonymous envelope in the mail, containing the time-stamped footage from the surgery, clearly showing her standing outside the OR with Ryan before the official declaration, her hands were already shaking too much to open it properly. Inside was just a USB no note, no threat, only the truth, and a quiet line in her head that wouldn't leave. "You signed the release form. Why did you sign it?" He woke up in restraints. His wrists were strapped with soft leather bands, his ankles secured to the lower frame of a hospital-grade bed. A soft four-pump ticked rhythmically at his side. There was no window. The room was grey, lit only by soft overhead LEDs that never fully turned off. The nurse, when she first noticed he had opened his eyes, didn't call a doctor. She walked in slowly, checked his pulse, then leaned in close enough that her breath fogged his oxygen mask, and whispered, "You weren't supposed to wake up." John didn't speak for 2 days. He couldn't. His throat was raw, stitched at the sides. He couldn't feel his legs for almost a week. Each day, a different staff member arrived, never the same face twice. No identification, no chart. He wasn't listed as John anymore. His wristband bore a barcoded ID, and the words, Level 3 Donor Recovery. Non-disclosure enforced. On the 10th day, a man in a grey coat handed him a clipboard and asked him if he could recall any family members to contact. John shook his head, not because he couldn't remember, but because he didn't want them involved. There were none. The Man smiled and said, "You'll be out of here in 3 months, maybe 6. Depending on how cooperative you stay." That was the start of his second life inside a building that didn't exist on any official medical registry, where patients didn't have names, only recovery stages. When he slept, he dreamed of Sophia's hand shaking as it hovered above a line that read "Final consent for irreversible donation." He had signed the pre-approval long ago, trusting her to decide only if he was truly gone. But in his dreams, he could feel her hesitate and still sign anyway, every time he blinked. He saw her face behind the clear divider glass outside the ICU. It wasn't guilt that lived there. It was resolution. She wasn't crying. By the time he walked again, 4 months had passed. The discharge was simple. He was given basic clothes, an envelope of untraceable cash, and a list of names he'd never seen listed as references, in case he got confused about his new identity. He tossed it into a fire barrel behind the recovery center before boarding the midnight train to the city. He didn't go to Deborah first. He didn't go anywhere familiar. He went back to the apartment he had once shared with Sophia. It had changed. The doorman didn't recognize him. The buzzer under their old unit number had a new label, R. Anders and S. Morrow. He stood there, watching from across the street until someone from the building exited and held the door open politely. John nodded and stepped through without a word. He didn't knock. He didn't even go to the right floor. He took the elevator to the rooftop, watched the lights flick on in what used to be his study. The curtains were new, the furniture sleeker. The balcony now hosted expensive potted trees and designer patio lighting. Down in the hallway, he asked the janitor casually about the new tenants. They moved in 2 weeks after that tech guy passed away. The woman said he was her late fiancé. He paused, then added, "Kinda fast, huh?" John smiled gently. People grieve different. He left the building quietly and walked 10 blocks to the public registry office. The clerk scanned his ID barcode. Her eyes flicked to her screen, then back to him. "Sir, this ID number is listed under a deceased donor file. Are you sure this is yours?" "I'm sure." She hesitated, then typed something under the desk. "Your death certificate was filed 4 months ago. It's official. You don't legally exist." That night, John stared at his own obituary. Short, clinical, a paragraph from the hospital. No quotes, no service. A vague mention of private cremation at the request of the family. It was Sophia's statement at the bottom that he read. 3 times, he gave everything. Even in the end, he was loved and missed. He laughed once, quietly, then folded the paper and placed it in his coat pocket. He existed more now than he ever had, but not as the man she tried to bury. He returned to his rental flat on the city's edge. It was modest, quiet, unremarkable. The kind of place people didn't ask questions. The kind of place you stayed when you wanted to be forgotten until you were ready to return. Deborah visited that night. Bringing hot soup and silence, he showed her the death certificate. She read it without expression. "They didn't expect you to check." "I'm not angry," he said. "Just remembering." "That's worse." He nodded. She sat beside him on the floor, crossed her legs, handed him a folder. "I pulled every access log from the donation system the day you flatlined. Want to see who filed the final report? I already know, but you want to see it anyway." He opened the folder. Sophia's digital signature was there, time-stamped. Less than 2 hours after the surgery. Before the second confirmation. Scan had even started. Beneath that, Ryan's authorization for donor. Release. He didn't cry. He didn't blink. He just stared. Sophia's signature trembled slightly. Just a bit, but enough to show hesitation. And then the stroke that committed it. He traced the ink with his finger, not out of affection, but precision. This wasn't about feelings anymore. This was about sequence. He left the folder on the floor and walked to the window. The city lights below glowed soft, warm, unaware. He didn't hate her. He didn't even want her to pay in pain. He wanted her to wake up every morning and wonder if today would be the day the truth found her. That was more permanent than rage. The envelope arrived without a return address. Cream-colored. No seal, just placed neatly on the edge of John's doorstep like someone had been there and wanted to be seen but not caught. He stared at it for a moment. No handwriting. No scuff marks. Crisp, as if untouched by air, inside. A USB drive. He plugged it in cautiously, air-gapped from any network. Deborah had taught him that much. The drive autoplayed. 4 camera angles, all from the surgical wing, time-stamped, unedited. Clinical, the first showed the operating room. Wide angle. He was there on the table, moving pale, machines rhythmically beeping. Dr. Ryan stood near the foot, arms crossed. Another surgeon handled CPR compressions. At the 2-minute mark, the room was focused. No panic. At 3 minutes, Ryan raised his hand. The compressions stopped. A nurse hesitated, looked up. Ryan said something off camera. The nurse stepped back. The monitor still read a faint rhythmia, regular, weak, but present. But no one moved. The second feed was angled toward the hallway. Sophia stood outside, not pacing, not sobbing, just standing there, holding a clipboard. Her fingers didn't tremble. She leaned against the wall, like she was waiting for a train. Then, calmly, she signed the top sheet. She handed it back, walked away. The camera captured her profile clearly. No tears, no hesitation. The third clip was from an office camera. Date stamped the night before the surgery. Sophia and Ryan both sat at a desk. A form was placed in front of her. A nurse read out loud, pre-consent, in the event of less than 10% vital function, probability, patient may be cleared for donation. Sophia asked no questions. She didn't read it twice, she just signed. The pen stroke was smooth, familiar. Like this wasn't the first time she'd signed something like that. John paused the video, rewound, watched it again and again. Her handwriting was perfect, not rushed, not distressed, no tremor in her grip. She'd given up before he'd even gone under. He pulled the drive from the port and dropped it into the sink. Ran water until the metal cracked. Then walked into the living room and sat in silence, the walls closing in like static. She hadn't just misjudged the moment. She had decided. He wasn't worth the risk. It wasn't just that she signed early. It was the way she signed, practiced, professional, detached. He had loved her more than breath. He'd written letters she never saw, fought pain she never knew. Trusted her with his ending, thinking she'd fight for a beginning. She hadn't. He stared at the wall for hours. No tears, just an emptiness. That moved in like a tenant. Took up space in his lungs. Sat behind his eyes. Something that made breathing feel borrowed. Deborah arrived around midnight. He didn't greet her. Just handed her the footage. She didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was quiet. What do you want to do with this? Nothing. Nothing. Not yet. Deborah looked at him. You could bury her with this. I'd rather let her bury herself. How? He stared at the wall again. By living with the possibility that I might speak. Silence lingered between them. She fall apart, Deborah whispered. He nodded once. She deserves it. He didn't. Replied that next morning, Sophia received her own anonymous envelope. Inside, a printed still image from the surgical hallway feed. Her, holding the pen. No note, no sender, no explanation. Just her own expression, blank, decisive, inescapable. She stared at it for an hour, before hiding it in the back of her closet. She didn't tell Ryan. That night, she dreamed the pen was glued to her hand. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't let it go. It burned. It bled into her skin. And John stood across the room, watching, silent, breathing, waiting. She woke up with bite marks on her own tongue. Ryan asked her what was wrong. She told him she was fine. He believed her. John didn't show up anywhere. No press, no lawsuits, no confrontation. But every time Sophia opened her inbox, she feared seeing a message from an unknown sender. Every time the phone rang from a number she didn't recognize, her heart skipped. She didn't know what he wanted. That was the punishment. Not knowing if he'd show up at the next gala. Not knowing if he'd leak the footage. Not knowing if he'd call her out in front of Ryan. Not knowing if he'd ever forgive her or if he already had. And that made it worse. The silence screamed louder than any courtroom ever could. Sophia began declining events. Stopped checking social media. Started waking up at 3 a.m. without knowing why. The fear wasn't just guilt. It was that he had become untouchable. She couldn't spin it, couldn't defend it. Couldn't even begin to explain to Ryan what she'd done without implicating herself beyond repair. She had planned to move on, planned to close that chapter like a tearless goodbye. But John hadn't closed anything. He was out there, breathing, watching and waiting. The invitation was public, charity gala, theme, second chances, celebrating survival. The irony made John smile. A neat little bow on a lie that had cost him everything: life, name, identity. Ryan's face was all over the promotional posters. The newly minted chief of cardiosurgery. Sophia stood beside him, serene in every press release, as if she were born to pose in applause. The proceeds would benefit transplant recovery efforts. A legacy of compassion, they said. John arrived unannounced. He didn't sneak in. He walked through the front doors, just like any guest. Handed his coat to the valet, and moved through the glittering lobby like he belonged. His suit was simple, black, tailored, understated. The only accessory, the silver watch Sophia had placed in the velvet-lined memorial box at his so-called goodbye service. The very watch she'd kissed before burying. The camera flashes had captured that moment, replayed it online like some tragic finale. It was ticking now, clear, visible, alive. He entered the ballroom. During her speech, Sophia stood beneath a suspended floral arch, lit by soft gold spotlights. Her dress shimmered, her voice airy and composed. This event means more to me than anyone knows. Because survival isn't just a statistic, it's a gift, a choice, a second chance to do better. She glanced toward the crowd and froze. A full second passed before she reacted. Her fingers clenched the microphone a little tighter. Her lips twitched. A pause, too long. A silence too loud. Gasps rippled from one corner of the room like a dropped glass. John stood calmly in the center aisle. No expression, no drama, just presence. Ryan's jaw shifted. His posture stiffened, scanning the crowd to see if anyone else was reacting the same way. They were. Whispers began. John stepped forward. Each movement calculated, not a hair out of place. He didn't storm. He didn't interrupt. He waited until Sophia's mic dipped slightly, her voice caught in her throat. Then he spoke. Only loud enough to be heard. Just once. My heart stopped for 4 minutes, he said. But the real betrayal lasted far longer. Silence collapsed over the room. Sophia stepped back half a pace. Her mouth open, no sound came. Ryan moved closer to her, but didn't speak. Cameras weren't raised, but phones were sliding out of pockets. Guests didn't know what they were witnessing, but they knew it was history. John adjusted the cuffs of his suit, nodded politely to no one in particular, and walked toward the bar. He didn't confront anyone, didn't raise his voice. He sat at a corner table and sipped sparkling water, watching as Sophia attempted to resume her speech. She couldn't, her hands trembled. Ryan had to close it for her. The rest of the evening moved like fog. Conversations tried to resume. Music played, but tension sat at every table like an unwelcome guest. John waited until dessert was served. Then he stood, walked out calmly, and passed an unmarked envelope to the head of the Medical Ethics Committee, who was seated near the board trustees. No words exchanged, just a brief glance. Inside, the full security footage, time-stamped, annotated, cross-verified. Sophia's pre-consent. Ryan halting CPR. The absence of follow-up scans, no speech. No press conference, just facts, by morning. The hospital board had convened. Within 48 hours, an ethics inquiry launched. Investigators pulled logs, subpoenaed files, interviewed attending nurses and surgical techs. Ryan's name appeared in every corridor whisper. Sophia's wasn't on staff, but her proximity raised eyebrows. The hospital's public statement was vague. "We are conducting an internal review to ensure compliance with our highest ethical standards." But the investors didn't wait. Stock fell by 13% in a week. A protest group formed outside the main entrance, holding signs that said, "Donor rights are human rights." Ryan's badge was temporarily suspended pending review. Sophia didn't appear in public. John declined every interview. His name didn't surface until a low-level report leaked his reinstated identity. Legally revived after a successful petition. With the civil court, his official death was expunged. He hadn't asked for any money. He hadn't filed a malpractice suit. When the board asked what he wanted, he answered simply, "My name back." And the lead investigator had asked. John had smiled, and her peace destroyed. He wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way people expected. Not loud, not explosive. His pain had matured into precision. He didn't need them to suffer publicly. He just needed them to look over their shoulder at every step. The second time Sophia saw him after the gala, he was seated across from her, in the family courtroom lobby. She had filed for an annulment. Ryan had objected. Publicly, he wanted to protect the image. Privately, he'd started sleeping at his brother's place. Sophia wore a beige coat. No makeup. Her hair was tied tightly, too tightly. She walked past him slowly, hoping he wouldn't look up. He didn't. He just spoke. "You knew I might survive." She stopped. He still didn't raise his head. "You signed anyway." She didn't speak. He finally looked at her. No rage, no accusation. Just clinical disappointment. Like a surgeon reviewing a failed graft. "You knew the odds were low, but not zero. You didn't wait for zero." Tears pricked her eyes, but he didn't care. "You signed because you wanted out." "John, no," he said. "You don't. Get that name in your mouth." He stood, brushed his coat sleeve, and walked past her without turning back. That night, Sophia received a final envelope. Inside, a single image, her signature. And below it, stamped in bold red ink, "Invalid consent, vital function review." Omitted. She knew what that meant. If the case went to court, she wouldn't just lose her reputation, she'd lose everything. Ryan never spoke to her again. John never appeared again in any public hospital file, but his name was back in the system. His watch ticked, his heart beat, and her silence. That was louder than any sentence. The statement released by the medical board was concise, clinical, and fatal. Dr. Ryan Calder and Ms. Sophia Wren were found complicit in pre-consented termination without due review. Licensure privileges revoked, recommended for permanent expulsion from ethical medical networks. It took less than 48 hours for every hospital partnership to sever ties. Ryan's resignation was immediate. His press briefing cancelled. Sophia didn't speak at all. The foundation she had helped build for donor advocacy folded within a week. Sponsors withdrew. Her name disappeared from the committee pages. And yet no one reached out, no condolences. No press offers. Just silence. Publicly, John said nothing. But the silence roared. A month later, Sophia walked into the private hospital wing where John had temporarily relocated for rehabilitation. She wasn't supposed to be able to access it. Deborah had handled all clearances, but somehow, Sophia was there. Pale, thinner, dressed in beige again, stripped of polish, stripped of presence. Just a woman carrying her consequences. She spotted him in the lounge, seated near the wide windows that overlooked the city. A tray of untouched food rested on the table. A book lay open beside him, her freed. He didn't look up. She stepped closer. Her voice was quiet, uneven. "I never thought you'd make it." He turned a page. "I mean after the surgery, she struggled. I really didn't think." He finally looked at her, not with anger, just distance. "I did," he said. "You just didn't wait long enough." Sophia's eyes welled. She stepped forward. Her hand reached across the small table between them, fingers trembling. "I wanted to fix it. Somehow, I wanted to talk." Just once, he stood. Not abruptly. Not with rage. Just stood. "You buried me alive," he said. "Then got married standing on my grave." Her hand dropped. Her lips quivered. "I didn't know how to live with the guilt." John watched her for a long time, then nodded. "Then don't." He turned away, walked slowly toward the hallway, his steps unhurried, every movement deliberate. She didn't call his name. She didn't run after him, she just stood there, sobbing. The door clicked shut behind him. Later that night, John sat with Deborah outside on the facility balcony. A thermal blanket over his knees, city lights flickering below like they had nothing to do with grief. She passed him a flask of lukewarm coffee. She came. "I know. Want me to file a restriction?" "No need," he said. They sat in silence a while. Deborah finally spoke again. "You could have ruined her, completely. In court, on camera, you still could." He shook his head. "She needs no help. She decay on her own. Every morning she wakes up wondering if someone found another file. Every time a number calls, she wonder who knows. Every breath she takes will taste like borrowed time." Deborah exhaled. "Cold." "Not cold," he said. Measured. She glanced sideways. "Do you think she ever loved you? Even once?" John didn't answer immediately. He just stared out into the fog. "I think," he said, "she loved being the woman who loved me. Until it stopped being easy." Deborah leaned back. "That's worse." He nodded once. Sophia didn't leave the city. 4 weeks after, people spotted her wandering the botanical garden alone. Sitting in her car outside old haunts. Once, she was seen outside the hospital, chapel just standing, not going in. Ryan tried to contact her twice. She didn't respond. The third time he left a message. Just 2 words. "We're finished." She deleted it. Then deleted the thread. Then the app. In the following months, John formally declined all documentary offers. A well-known journalist offered $1 million, exclusive. He said no. He donated the entire legal refund the hospital gave him to an anonymous recovery center. Under Deborah's name, he quietly bought the apartment complex. He once lived in Tor, down the old room, where Sophia had first said, "I love you." When the flowers died, no one replaced them. On the 1-year anniversary of his false death, John visited the cemetery for the first and last time. There was no grave. Just a plaque, a stone embedded in the earth beneath a maple tree. John Wren, beloved brave, at peace. He stared at it for 23 seconds, then walked away. Sophia arrived 2 hours later. She knelt where he had stood, touched the stone, and wept without sound. No one saw her, but she stayed until the sky turned violet. The stone never got updated. That was the sentence. He had come back to life, but she would forever mourn the man she buried alive. They all thought I died that night. In a sterile operating room, on a table too cold for mercy. Declared gone by a system I trusted. Erased with signatures and silence. But the truth is, the real death didn't happen with my pulse. It happened the moment she chose convenience over conviction. When she stood outside the operating room with dry eyes and a steady hand, signing away the last thread of us. It wasn't betrayal in a blaze, it was betrayal in calm. She didn't scream, she didn't fight for one more second. She let go, efficient, clean, neatly packaged grief for the cameras and the charities. And when they announced my death, she didn't bury me, she moved in with him. Wore white over my absence. Posed for pictures, as if love was recyclable. Her world needed a tidy ending, and she gave it one. But I didn't stay dead. The body is a strange thing, so is time. I clawed my way back with machines, medication, and months of voices I couldn't see. I woke up remembering everything: her voice, her promise, her silence. And I built myself again, quietly. Out of the ashes, she assumed, would never move again. I didn't come back for vengeance. Not in the way they imagined. I came back to reclaim my narrative. Not to scream, not to burn, but to breathe. In every breath I take now, I steal control from the people who buried me in ink and lies. I let them keep their gala nights, their press releases, their curated memories. Let them raise glasses to their lies. Let her wear silk and diamonds, and walk into rooms that will never feel safe again. She'll see shadows behind curtains, hear footsteps that don't belong. Every time her phone rings with a blocked number, she'll wonder if it's a reckoning. Every kind smile will make her flinch. Because guilt is a house with too many mirrors. I've watched her try to reclaim grace. She sits alone at events now. She speaks less. Smiles with more restraint. But the thing about reputations, once cracked, they don't shatter all at once, they erode slowly, and hers is eroding. People whisper. They don't ask questions aloud, but they search timelines, compare dates. Wonder why her grief was so brief, her marriage so fast, her silence so strategic. Her peace is gone, and she'll never find it again, and me. I walk unnoticed. No more headlines. No more sympathy. Just a name restored, a breath earned, and a spine built stronger. I don't speak of her anymore. I let her carry the weight of remembrance alone. The irony, she thought letting go of me would be her freedom, but letting go of her was mine. I'm not haunted. I'm not hollow, I'm alive, and that's the one ending they never controlled. Let her cry at every gala. Let her toast to ghosts, and give speeches full of regret, dressed as reflection. Let her wake each night, remembering my face in the crowd. I'm not chasing her. I'm not punishing her. I've just outlived her memory of me, and that's enough. Because the man she buried, he never came back. I did.